If MSPs, all they want to do is improve their own situation, we need to standardize because it's more efficient for us. The client doesn't care about that necessarily. And that's been the premise of the relationship for 20 years. And MSPs are starting to really make that transition to be like, hey, let's find out what this business does. How do they use technology? Where can technology help them actually, double, triple their revenue over the next few years and have a different kind of impact?
You're listening to the MSP Security Playbook, the show where modern MSPs come to sharpen their strategy, streamline operations, and secure their growth. I'm your host, Jacob Hazelbaker, BDR here at Heimdal Security, where we help MSPs win with unified, AI-powered cybersecurity solutions. Today, we're zooming in on a challenge that's quietly holding back growth in the MSP space, the mindset. For too long, many MSPs have stayed firmly in their technical lane, focused on tools and tickets, but not on the client relationships. That's led to a growing problem, commoditisation. So how do you flip the script and go from being just the IT guy to a trusted business advisor? Our guest today is Luis Giraldo, Chief Evangelist at ScalePad and a seasoned MSP operator with deep insights into what it takes to evolve and thrive in today's market. In this episode, Luis shares why customer success is the secret weapon MSPs are overlooking, how to bring that mindset into your day-to-day, and what best performing MSPs are doing differently to stay ahead. Plus, he tackles a listener-submitted MSP Hot Seat question on how to get started with customer success, even if you're a team of one. It's a conversation packed with practical ideas and fresh perspectives. But let's kick things off with today's threat briefing. Heimdal Security Cybersecurity Advisor and former Cybercrime Detective Sergeant Adam Pilton. Take it away.
Thanks, Jacob. Imagine this. A normal workday in St. Paul, Minnesota. Suddenly, public Wi-Fi goes down. Payment portals stop working. Entire networks go dark. This isn't a glitch. It's ransomware. So severe, the city declares a state of emergency. So serious, the Minnesota National Guard is called in. That's what happened in July 2025, when the Interlock ransomware group crippled St. Paul. The attackers breached systems, encrypted critical data, and stole 43 gigabytes of sensitive files. When the ransom wasn't paid, they leaked it all online. This resulted in disrupted services, shaken local government. And a reminder, no city, no school, no business is too small to be targeted. But St. Paul wasn't a one-off. Since September 2024, Interlock ransomware has been actively targeting businesses and critical infrastructure across North America and Europe. The threat is so severe that the FBI, CISA, and others issued a joint advisory. They warned that Interlock doesn't just encrypt your data, they steal it. And then they threaten to leak it unless you pay. That's double extortion, and it's designed to break trust and force payment. MSPs should take note, because you are a high-value target. Hack one MSP, and attackers gain a doorway to dozens, maybe hundreds, of downstream clients. St. Paul shows the damage to one city. Imagine the blast radius if they breach an MSP. So here's what you need to do. Keep critical systems separate. Don't let ransomware spread across environments. It's important to test your restores too, not just your backups. Offline and immutable backups are your lifeline. Watch for unusual logins, big file transfers, or beaconing. If you don't have 24/7 coverage, you should. Partner with a SOC or MDR provider. And this one I can't emphasize enough. Run tabletop exercises. Walk through what an Interlock-style attack would look like and practice how you detect, respond, and crucially, communicate. Official guidance has been issued. Bake this into your client playbooks. The St. Paul ransomware attack is a warning shot. Interlock is active, expanding and aiming directly at MSPs and their clients. Patch, prepare, practice. Because in a ransomware crisis, the only thing worse than paying ransom is being caught without a plan. Stay sharp. Catch you in the next threat brief. Back to you, Jacob.
Luis Giraldo, thank you so much for your time today, sir.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thanks for having me come out and hang out on the podcast.
You have a really unique background and part of your journey that led you to where you are today. So I was wondering if you could introduce yourself a little bit, where you were and how you came to be in your current position.
Oh man, yeah. So I'm Luis Giraldo. My my job is I'm a chief evangelist at ScalePad. ScalePad is a company that's got its start doing a very very specific thing with warranty lookups, and we're now a six product company across categories like lifecycle management, backup monitoring, GRC, analytics and BI, and quoting and contract management. So in all that time, the company is 10 years old this year, actually. So there's been a lot of evolution and progress in those years. But I was a musician also before that, and I was an MSP before that. And so I think it was one of those the things where I've had a number of things going on in the past. Music kind of led me to tech a little bit because I was always into keyboards and getting the music into computers and such. And then being around computers just kind of eventually got me a retail job at a Mac shop here in Vancouver. And then there was the opportunity to get into residential IT consulting, and that kind of graduated itself into business IT consulting. After 18 years of doing the MSP thing, I also started putting a foot into the vendor side and being on the software side. Yeah, I exited the MSP about 3 years ago, and I'm happily spending a lot of time now in market with partners with MSPs all over the world, just talking about stuff like customer success and how to improve project maturity or how to do any number of things that are topics that are super interesting to try and get MSPs to evolve and mature around.
I was also super curious. Something about your background that really stuck out with me and what you do currently at ScalePad is a lot of your focus is on customer success. That's super, super interesting to me because a lot of MSPs I talk with, they're focused on sales, but I haven't heard too many mention the customer success side of things. So I'm really curious, why do you believe that customer success in particular is now critical for MSPs?
Yeah, I think the realization of customer success is kind of a result of a bit of the commoditization that's been happening in the MSP industry. One of the challenges has been that as we've evolved, I think we've been being pushed down a little bit in terms of differentiation, in terms of retention. A lot of MSPs as they grow, they build out these turnkey sales departments, but maybe a little bit less focus on what we call the right side of the bow tie, which is, after the sale, after the contract. So if you think of a funnel, where you have your prospect and you do the sale and then they become a customer and then you have expansion and then you have maybe churn, we just turn it sideways and it becomes a bow tie. And the right side of the bow tie is what we refer to as the after the sale. And I think customer success, it's not new. It's been around in SaaS for, 10 years plus, and folks like Gainsight have developed products, and there's many products that in that category now. But folks like Gainsight have really dug deep on building a customer success platform. But nothing really existed like that for MSPs. And what we see is a big opportunity for MSPs to improve their retention, improve their expansion by just tweaking something that we call the growth loop. Spending more time doing the discovery, understanding the business goals, being really client centric, I guess is the best way I can describe it. Because over the last 20 years, I think we've been very MSP centric. And what that means is just, focused on our tech stack, focused on our standardization, on our operational maturity as MSPs, and not too concerned about the goals of the client and how to have impact and create impact for them. And so I think that's what this growth loop does, which I started to describe. It's this discovery, then it's value alignment, and then it's obviously showing the impact and creating the impact. So if you continue and you might drop into any part of that growth loop at any given time with any client. Those things are not necessarily in that order, but I think it's important to continue the process of always going back to the discovery, being client centric, always trying to align what you're trying to do with the values and goals that the client has. And then ultimately just delivering and talking about the story. Some friends that we have, the VCIO University guys, they say data in, story out. And that's so important.
I love that analogy too, kind of thinking of it the bow tie one, but also the loop because that reminds me so much of software development lifecycle, kind of this iterative, continuous, in this case, going back to the discovery phase with your current prospects. I find that to be a really interesting sort of mindset, like a different kind of mindset there for everyone.
Yeah. I think what I'll say about it is that, continuous improvement or the concept of continuous improvement is not new to most folks. And I'd say that, MSPs who have been around concepts like operational maturity level, which is a service leadership trademark. I'll give them the credit now before they knock on my door. But I think we've always wanted to find some kind of not parity, but some kind of alignment between the maturity that MSPs have and the maturity that clients have. And it's interesting because I think too much disparity in the operational maturity of those businesses that you're serving can be counterproductive to the relationship. And so I find that we try to find some little parity of operational maturity, but we want to grow together. And a lot of that just requires the continuous improvement. But insofar as the ability for the MSP to grow their relationship, to build trust, to be client-centric and be perceived as a truly a strategic business partner, I think it requires a bit of that effort on the discovery, the value alignment, and, the delivery of impact for sure.
That's a good mindset kind of shift there, which makes me curious. How do you incorporate that into your life as a ScalePad, working there, doing everything you are with MSPs? So for your current customers, do you work that discovery process, that iterative loop cycle ongoing, seeing how you can continue to help them into your regular meetings, or do you do a separate meeting? What's some practical kind of steps you take given you're so busy and everything?
You mean from my perspective between ScalePad and our own partners? Yeah, I think, the conversations that I'm having are precisely a bit of that curiosity. Tell me a bit about your process and, how are you doing things today with your customers? If I'm talking to an MSP, and if I were an MSP and I was talking to a customer, rather than, "Hey, what firewall do you have in your server room?" I might ask, "Hey, tell me about, that client intake when somebody shows up at your clinic for the first time." And so it's a bit of repositioning, the interest to be, client focused. Let them talk a bit about their journey and their downstream journey. I feel that that's one of the critical pieces of just enabling yourself to ask better questions is to just to be interested in the downstream client journey. And that's a bit of kind of what I do from my perspective is like, "Hey, tell me more about what you're doing here. Here's some opportunities to rethink a bit of the process around customer success. Here are some of the roles that maybe other folks in the organization are not thinking about that could be contributing to a customer success program inside of your MSP." Because I feel like, occasionally folks come in and say, "Okay, we're gonna give that customer success job to this person." And customer success is not really just, one person's gig. It's kind of this organizational mindset, right? So, yeah.
That's very true. It especially with MSPs, I find a lot of them, it's one person, maybe 10, 20 people running that. So yeah, that's a good point. You mentioned a lot of MSPs these days, they fall in the trap of commoditization, feeling like their services are just kind of standardized. It's hard to stand out amongst competition. I've heard this from a lot of MSPs actually, also through ASCII. I go to those events, heard them mention that as well. So, what advice do you have for MSPs today to kind of break out of that cycle, that trap of just being commoditized, of not really standing out amongst their peers?
Yeah, it's really about this shift from MSP centricity to client centricity, just getting super curious about the customer, their journey, asking more interesting and better questions. One that I bring up all the time in my conversations is to ask the question is like, "Hey, tell me how your business makes money." And, what's interesting about it is, like, how many layers of that onion can be peeled back as you start to answer. It's like, "Oh, well, before you sell a widget or before you sell a service, what does your marketing look like?" And so you start to understand all these different layers and nuances of how that business operates. And I think it's in those little nooks and crannies where the opportunity for technology to create an impact exists. And so it's so fun for somebody who can build that business breadth and depth to get a good sense of how that business operates so that we can then understand where technology can have an impact. And I think it's just a big opportunity. Now, traditionally, an MSP might have come into a new prospect sales call and been like, "Well, here's our stack, and we're standardized on these things, and we're going to deploy this, and by the way, we're going to do a big remediation project because none of your stuff is aligned, and so here's the timeline, and you're going to like it." And it kind of doesn't work well in the long term. You kind of miss that opportunity right at the head start of the relationship to play a role of value alignment, to understand what things. I saw a great video yesterday, little tangent. It was an Instagram video, a guy talking about the 4 pillars of value. The 4 reasons why people give you money. They give you money because you help them make money. They give you money because you help them save time. They give you money because you help them mitigate risk, or they give you money because you elevate their status. And I think this is kind of universally true no matter which angle you look at it from. And so if MSPs, all they want to do is improve their own situation, we need to standardize because it's more efficient for us. The client doesn't care about that necessarily. And that's been the premise of the relationship for 20 years. And MSPs are starting to really make that transition to be like, hey, let's find out what this business does. How do they use technology? Where can technology help them actually, double, triple their revenue over the next few years and have a different kind of impact?
That's very true. I've actually noticed a lot of MSPs doing that these days. Instead of just providing solutions to IT problems, they're getting into the business operation side of their clients. They're asking, kind of as you do, how does your business make money? And then I love your analogy as well, is peeling back the layers of onions to see, okay, what's the marketing of your MSP's client? How does that work? How do they get profit, revenue, new leads? So that's kind of interesting. It's like a strategic partner relationship.
And there are so many cross-functional things in between too. Like, when the lead goes from from the marketing team to the sales team, how is that lead being handled? What kind of friction do you have here? And I think the interesting thing of doing that is that the MSP has the potential to be fresh eyes on processes that they may have taken for granted, or they assume that it can be no different than the way they've done it for for years the same way. And so I think the opportunity to come in with fresh eyes and understand how things could change for the better, convert a manual process to a digital process, and so on and so on, I think is so powerful. And the basis for like a strategic relationship with the customer, truly, because if the customer in their eyes, and this is, I think, the litmus test, if the customer doesn't see you as strategic, then, the relationship immediately is going to fall to this very tactical, technical level. And so if that's already where you find yourself, then that's probably what's happened.
I imagine so. That's really interesting to me because a lot of MSPs, if you look at their offerings or services, they don't mention this kind of strategic partnership business consulting side. But I think a lot of times they're in a really good, unique position to do that because MSPs in particular have seen a lot of different businesses, how they operate. They've seen the businesses, the clients that's done well in their own business and those that haven't. So yeah, I think that's a great kind of mindset shift to stay out of the trap of commoditization because that's a rough one. So you've had a lot of different conversations with people in your business life, different areas of your career. So I'm really curious, what do you recommend for MSPs when they're going into those sales conversations today, especially about abstract topics? Cybersecurity sometimes feels more abstract. So how do you recommend that MSPs talk to their clients about some of these topics?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the key thing is you have to be thinking about impact and how do you create and lead with impact. And so I think that's where the transition of the conversation happens. It goes from like, I'm so concerned or interested in selling them some equipment or some infrastructure to, hey, I wonder if this process that they have between their sales team and their, deployment team could be improved to shorten their sales cycle or something like that. I think the obsession about the customer's journey is the thing that's going to help create impact and help you lead with impact. If that's not the conversation today, then it's to the client, it's always going to feel like it's a little bit more in the interest of the MSPs. Like, yeah, we get that you want to standardize firewalls, and I understand how that could be more efficient for you guys. And you can try and spin it any way you like to make it feel like it's a benefit to me, but that's not really creating impact at the end of the day to my organization. And so I think that's the trap, that we've fallen into is thinking that, don't get me wrong, standardization is important, but it's not important to the clients. This tech stack is not important to clients. Clients don't care about that stuff. They care about business outcomes. And we just haven't spent a lot of time talking about those.
I like that, and it kind of touches back to what you You described earlier about this continuous process of rediscovering what it is they really care about, how their business works, those pain points almost, if you will, seeing what's ongoing. And that's a good point because someone else mentioned to me that MSPs often have their customers for many years. So I imagine even if they have certain particular IT or cybersecurity pains today, those very same pains might be different a year, 5, 10 years from now. So
Totally.
that's necessary, I guess.
And having your ear to the ground on those things is key so that you even with small customers where sometimes we kind of capitulate to, "Oh, they're not strategic with us. They just want us to keep the lights on." They only need a once a year QBR or strategic meeting, and I think it's challenging. We as MSPs, I think we tend to conflate the concept of depth with the concept of frequency, for example. And so one of the things we immediately like conclude is, oh, this is a less strategic customer. We'll talk to them once a year during QBR season. And I think that doesn't help the building of trust. It actually probably erodes it. It's one of those, opportunity costs of doing nothing. The challenge is really, can you think about building playbooks for how you work with different types and different segments of customers and do the segmentation exercise. And I think that again, the frequency is the key thing here is to not let customers fall off the wagon of communication because this is where you hear about things. Even your small ones, like, just don't stop talking to them. Just lighten the load of the conversation or the strategic approach, but keep talking to them because you might hear from the customer that says, "Oh, yeah, yeah, we're looking at moving offices." Well, an office move is a big project for an MSP. An office move could be signaling, that they got an investment and you didn't know what because you hadn't been talking to them. I mean, there's so many little things like that that happen in the context of just keeping an ongoing conversation because you're top of mind and so on.
That's a good point. That's relatable. Office moves are difficult. I can attest to that one.
No doubt, no doubt.
And you mentioned earlier it's important to relay to your customers, your clients as the MSP, the impact, the value that you're providing to them. So for cybersecurity in particular, what do you recommend MSPs do in their approach to conversations to best communicate that value, the impact that cybersecurity provides for their MSP clients?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a couple of areas that make it easier to have that value alignment conversation. And one is to perhaps stop talking about individual point security solutions. I think that's just a result or symptom of the way that we have sold these things as they kind of entered the stack. We had a baseline stack of tools and so on, and then suddenly, oh, we need to be doing XDR now, and I need to charge a little bit more. So now on the next cycle, you kind of said, oh, well, we need to sell you XDR, and you kind of did this approach that was very point solution centric. It's no fault of the MSPs. I think it's really the kind of way that the industry has evolved over the last 5, 10 years. But I think abstracting the conversation to have a discussion around risk is much more interesting. Back at a exchange security event last year, I want to say we were, I think, in Dallas. This gentleman, and his name escapes me the second because I'm trying to pull into my deep storage here, but he was talking about compliance and we were talking about sort of the effect that he was a white hat. And so I had asked the questions like, what role do you think white hats play in driving legislation or something to that effect? And he said, the legislation will always be 10 years behind the technology. And so even when you go and talk about compliance, a lot of clients don't really care about compliance because maybe they're not required to do compliance from a legal perspective. Maybe their industry or vertical is not forcing them to be, aligned to any framework or anything like that. But guess what? Most businesses do care about? They do care about risk. And I think risk kind of encapsulates a lot of the security point solutions and conversations about cybersecurity that helps you understand A, the risk appetite of the customer, what kind of reality do they live in versus what you're experiencing. And so I think the conversation just needs to start there. It needs to start around risk and getting a little bit further away from the individual point security solutions. Because it's not a value driver at that level of tool, but it is a value driver at the level of here's the risk and impact to your organization. And that kind of automatically brings in the conversation around the solutions that help, solve for it.
Speaking to risk, that that one really hits personally because, I started thinking recently about communicating risk to your MSP clients, and lo and behold, my apartment flooded this week. So I started thinking,
Oh, no.
if someone called me out of the blue, they're like, "Hey, I'll reduce the risk of your apartment flooding a second time." I'd be all ears. I'd be super engaged in that conversation. So I imagine businesses have kind of the same mindset. Maybe not with a flood in particular, I hope, but, risk to their business, risk to the very thing they've been building and care about. So if you speak to that instead of compliance frameworks alone, because I mean, I for one find a lot of compliance frameworks to be a little bit complicated and kind of over my head. It confuses me sometimes. So it's hard to care about things you don't understand, but risk that you feel. From your vantage point now, what do you see that differentiates MSPs that are thriving from those that are just barely treading water, if you'll forgive the pun?
Yeah, it's interesting. Service leadership, who has been benchmarking MSPs for 25 plus years now, they do a very deep study on MSP profitability every year. And I think one of the recent numbers, perhaps from last year, is that about 31% or 32% of MSPs lose money. And so I think there's so many different levels to this. Obviously, there's a wide spectrum of maturity profiles in the MSP ecosystem. We always jokingly say the barrier to entry to become an MSP is fairly low. Like nobody's checking to see if you have, credentials, certifications, or anything of the sort. None of that's really required. And so that means a lot of people come in with very low maturity into a business that, people have been trying to evolve and improve for decades now. And so I think the biggest thing I see is clarity and focus is probably one of the biggest things. MSPs that start focusing on the specific thing they want to try and solve, and they really work on that. And maybe I'll categorize a couple of these things into operational maturity, which is kind of an inside looking view to the MSP's own ability to execute on some of the things. But then also in the market, I see already on LinkedIn or what have you, the conversations are happening, not even, prompted by me, but MSPs really talking about how they have to evolve the relationship, get out of the server room and back into the boardroom. Conversations are shifting from, standardizing on a stack to creating impact. I think these are the things that are starting to differentiate the MSPs that are doing really well. But I'd say from a performance and being in the top, decile of high performing MSPs, it's probably going to come down to focus and execution almost every single time. Deciding that this is the thing we're going to focus on, and working through it and solving for that.
That's a good way to summarize it. We have a question actually for you in the section we call our MSP Hot Seat. This one touches on some things you mentioned earlier, so I'm super excited to hear your answer for this one. So, an MSP wanted to ask you, how do I start implementing customer success without hiring a dedicated role?
Oh, that's a great question. You may recall that we were saying customer success is not a dedicated role. It's kind of this organizational mindset that you have to pick up to say, okay, this is how we want to focus on the conversation with our clients, and understanding, how every one of the existing roles in your organization is going to have an impact on that specifically. So I mentioned the role mapping exercise earlier. And again, hit me up if you'd like to see that spreadsheet of all the role mapping. It's an interesting exercise to workshop with your teams internally, to be like, hey, there's all these activities and things that various folks in the organization currently could be doing. Let's get some accountability on those. Let's get somebody to raise their hand and be like, I'd like to be responsible for that type of thing, and start bringing everybody into the mindset of customer success, which is to focus on that, quote unquote, right side of the bow tie. We want to create retention, and we want to grow with our existing customers, which is a lot easier than the obvious process of having to go sell a new customer and do everything from scratch.
That is very, very true. Very relatable. Luis Giraldo, thank you so much for your time today, sir, and really insightful conversation. So I really appreciate your time.
It's been my absolute pleasure, Jacob. Thank you so much for having me.
Luis Giraldo was a really fun individual to chat with. One thing he said that really popped into my head and just stuck in my head forever probably is the focus not only on MSP sales and marketing, but also on the customer success side. I think a lot of times it's easy as sales people, as business people, as the MSPs to focus so much on getting those clients, on acquiring new customers and onboarding them. But as Luis emphasized, almost like a bow tie, where you come in the sales funnel, you acquire a new client, and then it spreads out. You're looking to expand, you're looking to see what it is their ongoing business operations needs are, what is their ongoing pain points. So something that really surprised me was he said that discovery process with your MSP clients, that's an ongoing cycle. That's not a one-time done deal. That's something he keeps doing with his customers, and he recommends MSPs keep doing with your customers. I think that's super useful, especially in this day and age in which a lot of MSP services are almost commoditized. There's so many people that do the exact same thing you do. How do you stand out? That's a little difficult, but if you focus on peeling back the layers like an onion of how your MSP clients make money, how does the dentist office you're helping make money? How does their marketing work? When they get a new potential customer at their dentist office, how does that process work mechanically and how do they get money in the end? So in the end, becoming more of a strategic partner than just a solution break fix kind of MSP in the old school days. I think that's super critical. I agree with Luis, and I really enjoyed today's conversation. That's a wrap on this episode of MSP Security Playbook. Thanks for spending part of your day with us. If you found today's insights helpful, be sure to follow the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. It helps other MSPs find the playbook and level up their security game. Got a question you want us to tackle in the MSP Hot Seat? Or a topic you'd like to hear more about? Drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay sharp, stay secure, and keep building the future of your MSP business.